Hey guys, welcome back to the Wild Courage podcast. Today I'm with my old pal Britton, Collum, who most of you have probably heard Britton's story. If not, I suggest you go back and listen to it. And a couple episodes ago, I had the honor and privilege of having his wife Millie on. And Britton and I are fresh off the Pro-Am roping in Ogden, Utah. So we thought we would jump on here and talk about a couple things, starting with the weekend and then some other things we got going on to share with you guys. So thanks for getting on early, or not early in Oklahoma, but it's hot in Oklahoma. And he had to
Yes,
just
it
turn the
is.
air conditioner off because it was too loud. So he's sweating through it.
Yeah, we're ready for fall here for sure.
Yeah. So Britton has been at pretty much everything we've ever done as far as retreats and events, and is a leader at everything we do. And I just thought we could talk a little bit about the weekend. So for those of you who don't know, last year was our first time attempting to show up at an event with a booth, and I think we had 2 plastic tables and a cardboard sign. I think that you had the best handwriting, so you wrote some stuff down on the
Yeah,
sign, and we had a couple,
I got voluntold.
yeah, we had a couple
Yeah.
of t-shirts and sweatshirts, I think, and some hats. And it was funny because nobody knew what we were, who we were really. So some people were curious enough to stop by and be like, "What's this Wild Courage?" And a lot of people just kind of looked out of the corner of their eye and walked by, right?
Hmm.
But we did have some pretty cool conversations. But
For
this year
sure.
was a completely different experience for
It
me,
was.
anyway.
Yeah, I think collectively it was. Obviously we got to have two different booth space. We had one outside that I loved the vision of trying to create space to accommodate conversations. So there was a couch, there were some chairs, and the goal was just to create that safety, that comfort. Um, by and large, we all like to talk, and one of the things that I really value about the culture of the Pro-Am is it's such a family oriented environment. And I don't know that you always see that a lot of ropings, especially team ropings. That's not at all the case. Um, Most of the team ropings today turn into more like rodeo events. You're in and out, figure out when your draw is, just go make your run. Whereas the program very intentionally is set up to accommodate just the extension of the ranching lifestyle, honestly. And so the kids were there. The kids get to participate as well. And what what I feel like that does is it becomes more of this community that just gets to take pause in between, like at a neighbor coming over for a branding, and you get to catch up more personally in that time because you have the dedicated opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
It's not that you wouldn't do it, but the likeliness of you going over to your neighbor without being invited and being worried about invading their space or what they might have on their plate, um, it just isn't something that routinely happens. And so, what I love is that just becomes an extension of some of that culture where a lot of those, especially branding atmospheres are very family oriented. I remember that with, growing up with my dad, even down here in Oklahoma, where um, it it was you bring people in because you love to fellowship. It isn't just that you need some help, it's that you love to fellowship. And so having that booth space, I think, really sets a precedent that says, hey, we just want to get to know more of our community. Maybe you haven't felt seen in a while. Maybe, you know, and it was really fun to see how quickly that took off. Um, and then for those who wanted to buy some merch, and we had some really cool stuff there that you did up. There was a space up in the interior of the arena that people were able to swing by and buy, and some more Q&As. But yeah, it was a really really interesting atmosphere just in that, um, to facilitate conversation, which is a lot of what this whole point is under Wild Courage is what's your story?
Yep. Yeah. We were in Winnemucca at the Buckaroo Traditions Open, and Doc's like, we need to create a space for just that at the Pro-Am next year, and moving forward, get 2 booth spaces to do that, because Wild Courage is about story.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. I'm always taken back by people that listen to the podcast that intimately know the guest. I mean, I've had wives reach out to me like, I didn't even know that about my husband. And it's like, it proves to me how unintentional we are about getting to know each other by asking the right questions, or any questions. It's like, I've known that guy for 20 years and I had no idea his story.
Right.
So I love that we're trying to cultivate that of who are you, and have a compassionate ear to someone's story. And so I think one of my biggest takeaways, it's so layered of the weekend, however, was the difference between last year and this year. Obviously, Buck and Rieta invited us into that space at a different capacity this year, of like promoting us and kind of helping us drive the mission. But it was how well we were received. It was
For sure.
unbelievable. And how many working cowboys and the pros would approach us and be like, hey, love what you're doing. To the point, the week before, Doc's like, we ought to do a raffle. I'm like, well, Scott Grosskopf, who owns Buckaroo Business, has always said, hey, if there's anything I can ever do. And so I texted Scott and I'm like, hey, could we buy a bit at wholesale to auction off? And he's like, oh yeah, not a problem. We'll figure it out. And then we show up and he has a full head stall, rawhide range and romal, a beautiful bit. And he's like, here. And he just gave it to us. And then Jedediah Rice donated some change, and Nick Merritt donated a head stall and some stuff. And then pretty soon we had this raffle. And dude, last year, I think we had like $400 or $500 in sales, which isn't the point of why we're there at all.
Right.
But this does paint the picture. I think we sold like $8,000 in raffle tickets for our cause, from the generosity of our community donating things, which kind of is a barrier. It's kind of a marker, right? Of like, oh, we're behind this. And, every time I turn around, Jeff Mundell was talking about us and promoting us, and just the sub conversations that I know we all got to have, was really, really encouraging. And again, I just felt like we felt so supported and embraced by this community. It was really cool. And to have that couch and the chairs there, and we're going to obviously be careful of protecting conversations, because that's why Wild Courage works, is because we don't share those things. And you were there when this happened, but I think there were 6 or 8 of us had a couple hour conversation with some veterans and some cowboys. And I was just sitting there at one point and I was like, this is it. This is why we're here. Regardless of what else happens, that conversation blessed my soul so much. And the vulnerability of those guys and the safety they felt with these two worlds colliding. And again, it's the same thing we always hear, right, Britton, is, oh, I thought I was the only one that felt like this. I don't know how many conversations I've heard like that, of, I listened to this guy's story and I thought I was effed up. And hearing him articulate the same thing that I've been feeling for years made me not feel alone. And I felt better.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Like that was kind of the resounding theme, which I thought was really cool and validating to all of us, for doing this. So that was a couple of my big takeaways.
It's part of human nature to be speculative of something that may cost you. And in our story, it cost us something especially if we have not done anything to redeem it. And so what you see is a lot of people who have gone through their life in some fashion not getting a lot of those emotional needs met, and even in the cowboy culture itself. We've talked about this a little bit, but the danger of the mantra with which cowboy is represented and modeled is always devoid of emotion. It
Totally.
never, not once, is anybody going to say, hey, we've got these codes up here. These are the things that we live by. And although those are amazing, not once does it say, I'm committed to being an emotionally mature person. And you can't steward those with longevity if you're not doing that for yourself first. You can't steward your heart and then come over here and live in this mantra when you won't talk about what's really bothering you. And there's so many things about the culture in cowboys in general that allow us to isolate, allow us to disassociate, allow us to go out there and cultivate relationships with horses to the highest level, but withhold it from our wives or our kids or our neighbors that we don't get along with. And I find it fascinating just in the horse community in general, how willing people are to give grace and kindness to a horse, but they withhold it from humanity.
Yeah.
And so I share that as a backdrop to seeing the difference between last year and this year. There was a community, obviously largely due to Buck and Riata's support of this and their adamancy, that this become a continual conversation, not just a side conversation, not just a, oh, by the way, we've got some amazing partners here. It was, in the ceremony, the closing ceremony at the end, and the way that, they honored Buck and Riata for the impact that they've had with the award. Those were some things that you saw very tangibly different in just 1 year. And so what I love in that, Jeremy, is the other thing that we talked about some just in, probably our group, was the tendency for the cowboy culture to wait for people to prove themselves.
Mm.
And it's understandable to a degree, because I don't think that it's any different in most any other facet. You look in sports, somebody's over there talking about scenarios, and you probably have a tendency to sit back and watch, or whatever facet that you want to describe as far as the category goes. But the cowboy culture is very much intolerant of posturing.
Mm.
But I find the dichotomy in that, because that's all most of the community will do with their emotions is posture. And so you see a lot of resistance of people coming in and should I trust it? Should I not trust it? And you end up hearing this mantra of trust is earned, right? You earn stuff in the cowboy culture. And I would really push back against that, because trust is never earned, it's cultivated. And if you don't give somebody access, how do they ever cultivate something that you won't allow them to partner with you in? Because that's the way it's actually evolving. So
Yeah, that's
I
good.
watched a lot of the community choose to partner with what was going on, whether it be in conversations, whether it be in support. There was just very much a different approach to the engagements this year than last year. And I personally get astounded by that, because what a difference just 1 year made.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It was like everybody's kind of watching from a distance, like, wait, what is this? And then I think, and in our group, we've talked about this for years, obviously, but so much of this journey is permission. In that, hey, if Scotty Van Leuven can talk about these things and Tyler Avent can talk about these things, who are all respected in their in the cowboy community at large, and Greg Allred can show emotions on a podcast, who's respected in this community, then, and all the other guys, right? Dakota May was just on, and that kid blew my mind because he's a very quiet kid, young man, and doesn't ever look for any kind of spotlight or anything. And I say all that to say, it's giving all those other guys permission to, I think, engage with us in a way that hadn't those guys gone first, they wouldn't feel like it's okay. It's permission to say, I'm not doing good. I'm not okay. Or, and here's the scale from, I had guys approach me that I didn't know and tell me the impact that this message has had on them, to other guys just write up and not sure what to say, but like, hey, I love what you guys are doing, and write off. And I'm like, that costs them something, but this community, through this message of hope and vulnerability, it's giving permission to everyone to take a look at it. And Buck's done such an incredible job, obviously, being on the podcast and talking about mental health and suicide and emotional health and getting help, and then honoring us. I think it was Saturday morning before we started, like, hey, you don't know those, our friends that have taken their own lives. We all say the same thing. I thought they were fine. It's the guys that seem to be really serious about it are the ones that we don't know are going to do it. And so that also is obviously permission. It's just permission. Like, hey, it's okay to get help. I would not be sitting here had I not got help. And the more I think this community embraces that, the further we can take this down the road. And I don't know, it's exciting. It's humbling, and it's encouraging. And mostly I just feel grateful for how this community's embraced us and our message. So yeah, it was pretty cool weekend for sure.
But I mean, even if we use the analogy of the pro-am and the roping shots and different things, you got a guy that next one, and they've been holding that calf for a while, and he's choking out, about to lose his air. And you've got somebody over there that doesn't have the confidence to throw a shot, and they're letting that calf actually choke out before they finally throw the loop. Like, there's a measure of stewardship that just becomes negligent in that regard, because it's about them, not about the thing that they're trying to partner with. And so that becomes kind of the way that I love to try to bounce conversations around, because those scenarios are so relatable to people, right?
Yeah.
Like when we're in this culture and we're talking to one another, I'm like, we don't want to wait until something's choked out to throw the loop. I'm sorry, we don't. We don't want the clock ticking and we're over 2 minutes. We're over 3 minutes. We don't want to wait that long before we get that pretty loop. It doesn't have to be that way. And the problem is everybody's suffering on account of somebody withholding throwing that loop. Everybody's suffering. It's at the expense of the whole team. And so that really is a picture to me, Jeremy, in this conversation. And I'm unapologetically passionate. Like, I know I will offend some people, and it's not my heart to offend people. It's just I'm intolerant of what we've said, okay, this is acceptable.
Yep.
I won't agree with it. And even when we were sitting around 6 or 8 people, and this person was sharing some of their experiences going ranch to ranch and cow bosses that are just jackasses. And somebody says, well, that's just kind of That's what you have to expect. And I'm like, that's bullshit. That is not. There's a generation in that arena that is listening to people say emotional health is actually relevant. And so what if by the time that they become managers of ranches and that kid's kid goes to an experience that all of his conversation says, well, this is just kind of the way it is. And that kid's like, but dad, that wasn't my experience. What? Did I miss it? Because that was the kindest interaction that I ever had. And not only were they kind to me, they were kind to everything that they were taking care of. I mean, if we go back to Scott, I listened to he and Andrea's conversation the other day, and that was really a focal point of his going, this culture has lost in this new generation the awareness of stockmanship and stewardship of the animals. And when we put a clock on it, all of a sudden you see all of that sensitivity go out the window. And it doesn't matter that it's livestock. We do that with one another. When the clock's ticking and we feel like that we're running out of time, it gets so introspective and so self-focused that we're not paying attention to how that impacts the other person across from us.
Yeah, that's such a great analogy of if we haven't done the work and we put pressure, it's no different than when I'm not doing okay inside. That analogy is like you get when you have fear to self-protect, we go to measures of control, right? And if you flip that analogy over into, and you alluded to it, like our families, how many times are we out of fear and control choking the air out of symbolically of our wives and kids?
Mm-hmm.
Because, and then flipping back to the open analogy, it's like, are we putting in the time? Are we putting in the work to, when the pressure's high, when the stakes are high, we're prepared and ready to handle it? And we can do it with grace and understanding and skill. And yeah, that's a great analogy. I like that.
And even as a dad, like if I was to be the guy that had necked that calf and I'm holding it for one of my kids, and I know that they're right at the precipice of about being ready to throw it, and I'm still holding onto that calf knowing they're about to choke down, I probably don't have the tendency to let that calf take a breath and let my child fail and miss the opportunity, because I'm still being affected by what they do and don't do, right? So in the big umbrella of conversations, there's so many things that we subconsciously agree to because of how it affects the way that we define ourselves. It's self-worth.
Well, and that,
And
yeah, go ahead.
no, I mean there's a lot of layers to that. Some of it can be feeling based, but a lot of it's belief based. And if you have a certain perspective about who you are, then you don't let other people see any other version than that. But the problem is most people see right through it. You know, to your point, Jeff Mundell ended up doing a drawing
Oh,
yesterday or the day
dude.
before.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
And literally, he had a mask being pulled off the face of this cowboy guy. And the mask had the smile, the stash looked good, right? And then when he lifted it off, there was this tear running down the cheek, a major sorrow on this cowboy's face. And it was just such a powerful and provocative piece of work that really represents a lot of what we're doing, a lot of what we see in guys trying to present something that isn't honest or accurate because they fear that they won't be received otherwise.
Yeah, some of the language that we've learned in this space is we would call that our false self, right?
Mm,
Like, what are we presenting to the world, especially when you go to town or whatever? You can plug that into anything, right?
right.
And who are we at home? Are we the same guy that has the fake false self that we're presenting? Because we all have insecurities, right? And I'll be honest, I had the most anxiety about this roping because I had not had time to ride my horse or practice. Full disclosure, I hadn't been on my horse since the last branding I went to or even picked up a rope.
Mm-hmm.
And so I I couldn't sleep. I mean, this is like, I think they put a post I saw on social media that said the Pro-Am's 11 days away, and I got a gut ache immediately because I'm not prepared.
Yeah,
I haven't put in the work. I haven't practiced. I'm trying to rely on a skill set that I was really good at 15 years ago.
for sure.
I haven't cultivated it. It's not the priority in my life any longer. However, I don't want to fall on my face. I don't want to hurt my team. And my ego and my pride is saying, you're going to suck. And rightfully
Not
so.
not to mention that you ended up having a back throw you down.
Oh, yeah. And then my back went out the day before. But, excuse me, I it's kind of that mask thing, right? Is like, we're so guarding the perception that people have of us and the measures that we will take to make sure that people experience us a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes is that false self
Right.
because of what we believe about ourselves, right? It's like when we're looking in the mirror and that self-talk of what we see when we're looking back, and we think about all the ways we've blown it or currently blowing it with the things that really matter, right? Like how we treat our wives, how we treat our children, how we treat our animals, how we treat our colleagues, and really how we treat ourselves.
Right.
And that's a tricky, slippery slope when you start to unpack, why do I show up the way that I do? Why do I have these beliefs about myself? And then I always hated that, like, my wife and I would fight all the way to church, get to church, put those masks on. Good job, good standing in the community. And the hypocrisy that I felt as a human being created this disdain that I had for myself that really fed into my addiction. Like, what a piece of shit.
Mm.
It's a lie. The whole thing's a
Right.
lie. The whole thing's a lie. And I don't think I'm alone in feeling that way. I know I'm not,
Right.
because I've had so many conversations with guys, and I just have so much compassion for guys that are at that place, because I get it. I know what it feels like, and it sucks. It's a loop that you can't get out of.
Mm-hmm. So if you think about this weekend though, Jeremy, one of the things that I really appreciate, um, and we talked about this, there's a difference when somebody comes in and it may be a really good resource, but it exponentially has a different impact when they're very much a part of the culture. So you and Greg and Justin Rocket, he was in there when you guys are saying, "Hey, this is a value system of ours, but we're still a part of you." I think there's receptivity in that, right? But I would ask you the question, what would you say was kind of your primary takeaway or value of the weekend from last year? Not to compare, but what did you see different, um, personally within the context of Wild Courage? What do you feel like that you left there with going, man, what another win?
That's a great question. I honestly think I'm going to bookend it.
Okay.
There was a gentleman that was a cowboy his whole life. It's the only way he made a living his whole life, and he was probably in his late 60s, and he came up to me Sunday morning, and right in front of the booth, in front of everyone, he's like, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know how much this message has meant to me. And then he got really emotional and just started to weep. And his heart for this community and his own journey with sobriety and willing to want to do something and help. But he was just really blown away that at this stage in his life that there's somebody doing something for this community in this aspect that was really powerful and moving to me. Because he took the mask off and he didn't care. He didn't care that there was people around. And he shared with me some experiences of his, and it was very impactful to me. And those aren't my stories to tell, but later in that day, this young man came up to me, like shaking, nervous. He's like, I gotta talk to you. And I didn't want to, but I got to leave. And I just want you to know that these stories have impacted and changed my life so much that I'm scared, but I need to tell you. And I stopped, I listened, and I'm like, how old are you? And he said, I'm 20, sir. And I just was like caught by those two things, by this guy, this sage, this elderly guy, and by this 20-year-old who's like, I'm making different decisions for my life based on hearing from these guys. And I got to share with him, hey, dude, a large part of the origin story of Wild Courage is a bunch of us getting healthier, saying the question, what would we go back and tell the 20-year-old version of ourselves? What choices would we make different if we had new information? If we knew that it was okay to explore some of these things, especially within this masculine community of men, right? And so to me, Britton, that was a big takeaway. Also, a lot of the conversations in the arena, you're right, the proximity of putting my hat in the draw and showing up even though I wasn't prepared. And being horseback for hours at a time and having those conversations of guys in varying depths, but just recognizing the cost of what it took those guys to say something, whether it was long and profound or again, hey, love what you're doing and ride off.
Right.
That was impactful to me. And why I continue to say like how we were embraced by this community. It's hope giving. Because it's permission. Hey, it's okay to talk about this stuff because we've all lost too many friends who didn't know it was okay and they didn't see another way out. And somewhere along the line, we use this language. They partnered with the lie about themselves that they couldn't get out from under to the point of taking their own life or isolating themselves by damaging all the good things in their life because they've believed full-heartedly that they weren't worthy of. And I say this all the time. If you have any level of self-hatred, you convince yourself you're not worthy of being liked and being accepted, let alone loved. That's prison, man. That's as lonely as you can get.
Right.
When your belief system is, I'm not worthy of love. How do you treat yourself? How do you, you can't even accept people that try to love you or care about you because you're like, I'm not worthy of it. I won't even accept it. It's like, I know that's a bad check. I'm not even going to take it because I know it's going to bounce.
Yeah. There's two really, there's two questions that I feel like are really significant indicators to this conversation. The first one is when you ask somebody, what's your greatest fear? That question, that simple, is the on-ramp of, as you and I understand, exploring where our needs weren't met. And our greatest fear is that we end up being the product of the result of those needs not being partnered by. And that's the direct correlation to our self-worth. The second one is simply the follow-up, what do you need? And I'm amazed at how many times when you just simply ask that question, what do you need? And people will be like, what are you talking about? Or especially in guys, I'm like, well, I don't need anything. I'm good. I'm real good. You know, and it's like, no, you're
Yep.
not. No, you're not. Like you've got 3 masks on your face right now and you're screaming for help, but your pride's actually in the way. And it's understandable. Like those self-protectors, they are so valuable for where you have been run over, where you've been violated, where you've been neglected, where you've been treated with less dignity and respect than you ever deserved in your life. Understand. But I refuse to allow you to project that onto me right now. And so right now I'm asking, what do you need? I'm not your solution, but I want to see you, I want to hear you, or I want to know you. And the only way I can do that is that you have to choose to be a powerful person and tell me what you need. And when you identify what you need, I can choose to partner with that or say, hey, let me find somebody that could.
I love this because when you start understanding this, this is where my ability to have compassion for humanity started to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Is some knowledge of understanding our nervous system, our soul, of, oh, that guy's not an asshole. He's really hurting. He really has a bunch of needs that never got met, whether it's a little boy, a young lady, a 16-year-old, never had an affirmation from a father, never was
Mm-hmm.
initiated. It makes sense why this person shows up the way they do.
Right.
And then I don't have judgment for them. I have compassion. This is what changed everything for me was, and I'm a broken record, dude, but you cannot give away what you don't have.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have compassion for yourself, you can't give it away.
Right.
If you don't love yourself, you can't. You can have affection towards someone and do your best to show up and love them, but I think for the long haul, if you don't love yourself and have compassion for yourself, the runway for a relationship is pretty gosh damn short.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because when you're choking the air out of it, because it's all going sideways,
Yeah.
that compassion and love that you claim you have for someone, it's the first thing to disappear.
Right.
It's out the window. It's gone. And
Right.
that's why we use language and have big emotions towards the people that we love and have compassion for. It's the first thing that goes out the window, right? So for me and my journey of, which I've talked about enough on here, but it's relative. I hated myself so much, Britton. I was not capable of figuring out how to love anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I looked in the mirror, it was so ugly. The view I had of myself and my self-worth and what I was worthy of. I was not
Right.
worthy of my wife's love. So that I did everything I could to sabotage it. Out of that self-defense mechanism
Mm-hmm.
of building walls up around my heart. I would be verbally abusive to her so that she would stop saying, "What's wrong? I love you. I'm here for you. I want to support you." And subconsciously I was like, I'm not worthy of it. So I'm going to blow this up. I'm going to make
Mm-hmm.
you get away from me. quit putting pressure on me to try to show up for me, because I don't want it. I'm not worthy of it. I am not worth your love and affection. And then you add a kid to that who has this weird, crazy, unconditional love because they're non-communicative.
Right.
And it's like, I got to get away from this because this is too hot. I don't know what to do with this type of unconditional love. Because this kid, no matter what I do, just wants to be near me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started finding ways to sabotage that and be at work longer and be away from the family, because I was like, you do not deserve to be a father, a husband at all, a father. And I don't think I'm alone in this train of thought with guys that isolate, especially if they're in addiction, especially if they have shame and guilt of not being worthy of being a husband. And then a dad adds a whole nother level on top of that. So we run further.
Right.
Because we're like, this kid's better off without me. How many times have we heard that? I've said that to myself 1,000 times.
Yeah, and
My
I would even
daughter's
just
better off without me. And that's why I wasn't in her life until the last, 7 years. I'm like, she's better off without even knowing who I am.
Yeah. I think it's also important, Jeremy, just to kind of take pause for a second, because oftentimes we can get into these conversations and maybe the focal point ends up being this brevity of either life or death. Right? There's a lot of conversations around the ultimate consequence of a person not going on the journey is death, whether it's literal or emotional. It just is. But what I actually want to just reiterate is, we're not trying to have this conversation so that we solely focus on the prevention of suicide.
No.
I don't want to get in on the journey right before somebody chokes out. That's not where I want to show up. I want to show up before we ever walk into that arena going, hey, would you be on my team? There's something about you that looks pretty interesting to me. Could I spend some time with you?
Yep.
That I want to get back here, because the reality says every one of us have had unmet needs. Nobody gets out of this life without having rejection from a need. That's a fact.
No matter
And
how
what
good
that
your parents, no matter how good your parents were, and we're not villainizing parents, but
correct.
they're human.
Right. But because that's where our needs begin to get met, through the infrastructure with which we were brought into the earth. And so if it is your biological parents and they're taking on the journey of raising you, whether it's your biological, whether it's adopted, whether it's extended family, doesn't matter. People don't often always know how to meet a need. Now, here's the caveat. It isn't that they don't know how to meet your need that you ought to be frustrated by. It's that they never learn how to circle back and apologize for missing it. And when they don't try to make amends for meeting your needs, that's where we get onto this belief system that we are not good enough, because nobody ever apologized for how they missed me. And unfortunately, we see a lot of that mindset in the cowboy culture. There's so much pride that people do not go in there and say, I need to own the fact that I blew every bit of that up.
Why is that? We don't like being presumed as weak.
Well, I think a lot of it just goes back to how close we affiliate to this perverted definition of a hand. And so if we're the hand, but the variable is our horse today, or the variable is the weather today, or the cattle, or the hired people, help, like we blame shift instead of simply saying, whether or not that really was on me, I'm going to take ownership of it, because as a man wanting to lead, there's a precedent here that I'm choosing to set the example around. What I'm not going to be is a doormat, but what I am going to be is powerful enough to say, I'm okay with knowing every bit of this may not have been my fault, but I am going to own the part that I believe that I did play a role in. And when we talk about humility, that's really the conversation. The definition of the majority of cowboy culture is not, it is not received and it is not defined with humility. I'm sorry, it's not. And I have been that guy.
Oh, dude. Yeah. Me too.
When you get really good at a particular gifting, it is very difficult. It's very difficult to be humble. Because if you're always succeeding in that gifting, then there's always this opportunity for you to have a position that says, well, you don't really know. You don't really know. And I would go back. One of the most profound things that I remember Buck saying when he was visiting with you, I believe it was on your conversation, is somebody coming up talking about horsemanship, and he would ask, how many horses have you started? And it's like 100 or whatever. And he's like, he laughed and he said, come back when you've gotten 1,000. Come back when you've gotten a couple thousand. Like, let's talk then. No offense, but 100 doesn't even get you warmed up. And honestly, if we correlate that to human interactions, it's really no different. If we don't put ourselves in the type of vulnerable space that we use in cult starting conversations to not be the answer to that scenario with the cult, but to be an opportunity for that cult to be cultivated past where they can without human interaction, we're going to learn so much about where we're failing that dynamic. And it can't always be the horse's fault that it doesn't work. And when that horse goes to somebody else and we keep seeing these themes that show up with this particular hole being addressed in these colts that leave, that's just highlighting a gap that we're not covering the basis on some of that foundational work, right? It's not an indictment to us as a person. It just means that we're missing some steps that need to be readdressed. And that's the totality of our conversations going, we're not here to fix anybody. We don't have the answer for another human being.
Nope.
But we refuse to allow the same types of conversations. And I'm not going to reject you if you're over there talking about all of what you've accomplished in your life. But at some point, I'm going to say, as we experienced even at that group, I'm like, hey, tell me about your childhood. Like, it was so left field. And I'm not trying to kick down a door that a person didn't give me access to, but I'm like, you don't even realize that door that I just knocked on may be the answer to a lot of the things that you're seeking, but nobody's helped you go there.
To me, that goes back to what needs weren't met.
Mm-hmm.
And we're always trying subconsciously. If you don't know this language, it's because you don't understand it, but it's happening inside of you. We're looking to find a way to get the needs met that we've never had met. And we don't even know what that means or how to do it. So we find a bunch of unhealthy ways, again, subconsciously, to do it. And that can be through accomplishment, achievement, addiction, unhealthy relational behaviors, all the things. And our nervous systems are just always on the fritz because we never have peace. I knowing what I know now, I look back and I'm like, I don't think I had peace for 20 years. I think I was in constant searching for something. I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't have a map. I didn't even know I needed it because I'd never heard any of these kinds of conversations before. Like I heard this weekend so many times. I just thought I was messed up. And it was my job to outrun it, stay ahead of it, so nobody could ever find out that I was messed up. Again, it's a perfect scenario to be a cowboy because you get to move, you get to be on the run, you get celebrated for seeing new country and all the things.
Right.
And now, knowing what I know now, I'm like, oh, I just needed to stop running and get somebody to show me how to get those needs met. And so much of it was No wonder I was blowing up my marriage, because a lot of those needs, my wife, it wasn't her job to fulfill them.
Right.
It was going on the journey of getting whole and healthy and not lean into codependency of trying to find someone to fix me, to your point.
Yeah, I love that you just said that, because I would even share a personal experience just within the last couple of weeks. I had several days in a row where I was just super intense. And most people perceive me as a pretty intense person to begin with, right? I mean, it's just it's a part of something that horses taught me a long time ago. I don't need people to tell me that. But what I was navigating, a lot of details, I'm not going to get into all that stuff, but one morning Millie says, "Hey, what do you need?" And this isn't a new conversation in our house. We're both life coaches. We coach one another to our annoyance sometimes,
For
right?
sure.
And so it wasn't that was a new question to me. It was in that moment I chose to really um be responsible for communicating something that she had made an ask in, because it took courage for her to make an ask. Like, I want to highlight that. But what it isn't is, it is not her responsibility to do my work. So even by her making the ask, what happens sometimes is that we love somebody so much that if they don't answer that question, we'll start trying to show up and partner in the way that we think might meet the need that that person in that moment didn't have the courage to personally communicate. And so I was wrestling, and it took me a minute, because I'm very much an internal processor. And finally I said, honestly, I think I just need permission to not have to be okay in the moment. Because one of the things that I've struggled with the majority of my life is that big emotions weren't safe. There's really not a whole lot of way for me to downsize whatever my package is. Right? So when I'm really processing, when I'm really struggling, everybody can feel, especially when you have feelers in your family, they just discern emotions. If I have people that can feel that stuff, it would be easy for them to want to associate it to themselves, and or maybe own something that they never did anything about.
1,000,000%.
And so it's my job to really reiterate to them, hey, trust me when I tell you this, you've done nothing wrong. I'm just trying to be okay with the fact that I don't want to stuff this emotion. I don't want to go out there and find my coping mechanism. I need space to not be okay. And that you trust that this will be very short lived, because usually if I can sleep, and if I can get enough, this is me, if I can get enough vertical time and I can talk to God and I can really get to a place of peace that you were talking about, I'll be all right. I'm going to be a lot softer. But right now, what I need is space to not be okay, because I don't know what to do with some of the things that I don't have answers for. And when we don't have answers, we go to scrambling and we try to fix. It's a control mechanism. We're doing everything we can to try to determine the outcome. And it's premeditated to mitigate the exposure that we're going to have for that need to not be met.
Yep.
And so I'm like, I know me well enough. I just need space to not be okay. And can you be okay so that this is, I know it's uncomfortable for you because you feel all this, but please don't own it. And those are moments where when I get met that way, golly. There are layers and depths of our wounding in this journey that we don't know how deep they go. And so when somebody says, hey, I'm okay with you being big, and I'm going to do my work so that you can be big, and it doesn't jeopardize me feeling safe, then I have permission to actually be okay with this, to the degree that it continues to heal some of that, all that other stuff.
So good.
It's a process, man. Like, I'm not fixed. You go through seasons. I'm a grandparent now. I'm only 47. I mean, it's just, there's so many things that you don't even know that you're going to be subjected to in life because you don't live there with a crystal ball going, okay, here it comes. Let me get ready for that. Closing out the
Yeah.
estate of my mom's, it's
Mhm.
like there's all these dynamics that you just don't know what to do with. And as much as we wish that everybody was on the same page, that's not reality. And so part of the way that you begin to address that, it's not that everybody agrees, it's that everybody chooses to be a powerful person in the interaction and say, this is what I need. And somebody in that circle says, hey, I would partner with that. Hey, I feel like I can probably meet you there. And that's what I'm alluding to with my wife. She just beautifully gave me the space not to disconnect, not to avoid, but to be so okay with herself that I was able to just not be okay. Because even me as a man, my little boy still needs safety. The little boy within me that's still processing previous hurts in my journey still needs a safe place. And so I so praise God for the fact that he gave me that in a wife, because my little boy still needs comfort, because that's the role of the feminine heart of God, is comfort.
It's good.
I even think this, Jeremy, that a lot of times when you're listening to people identify what they need, if it falls in the category of safety, there's a father wound. And if it falls in the category of comfort, it's a mother wound.
For
Right?
sure.
And so when you're listening to what people are saying, then it gives you a bit of an ability to kind of say, okay, I'm not responsible for this, but do I have those attributes to be able, because even as men, I just want to make this clear. I am a dad of only girls, 4 daughters and a granddaughter. Only had sisters. I am not an expert on women. I just have a lot of experience. And so what I do know is that even as a man, there's still a measure of comfort that I can bring into that. Not just security, I can actually bring comfort. But I'm not trying to replace the role of the feminine nature. So there are times where we have the ability to meet people's needs, and it may be challenging for us because it may not always be something that we're adequate in or that we feel comfortable around. And I always go back to using the analogy with cults. When you have a lot of different cults show up from a lot of different backgrounds, it's not any different. You're not well equipped for all of those different types of dynamics. But what you can do is say, I'm going to build safety or comfort around the things that I do know that I can bring to the table, because
Yeah.
this is who I am. And I'm going to trust that that's going to be enough for you and I to connect in a way that we get to keep moving this forward in trust. And there's a foundation that I'm going to try not to violate, because I'm going to be checking back in with you. Does that work? Did I meet that need? Did I partner with that in the way that you anticipated? And have the courage to say, it was close, but actually this would be a better way. And so that's part of the way that we redefine our self-worth, is that we begin to have the courage to go internally and say, what is it that I need? And there was even some people that said, I don't know. I don't have any idea. Okay, no
That's
pressure.
that's the most common answer, I think. Right?
Yeah,
With men
absolutely.
anyway. I
For
have
sure.
no idea.
Yeah.
Because we don't ever think about what our needs are. We have them, and we sure get disappointed when they're not met, but we don't know how to articulate because we never are asked that question. I remember the first time you asked it to me a couple years ago. I was like, what kind of question is that? And I have no idea. But it's been so cool because I know you're going to ask me that now. I start thinking about that, which then I identifies like, wow, because we're all like hard chargers, fixers. Hopefully we're aiming higher with our marriages and kids, or their pursuit of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love the conversation on this question. And I invite everyone listening to this, like, what are your needs? What do you need? Because if you don't know, that's a good place to start in this journey of like, I I think I need to feel heard by my spouse. I wish they would not try to fix me. I
Mm-hmm.
wish that they would just listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've said this before, shared this with you, but the three most powerful words that can come out of my mouth for my wife is I don't know.
Mm.
Because we feel like we always got to have the answers, right? Because then we feel
Sure.
insignificant if we don't know something. So I would just start making stuff up, right? Like, I think it's this or that. And my need to be right was so important to me, which I think is just part of my wife just needs me to listen to her sometimes. And I don't got to
Mm-hmm.
have the answers. Even with the tools I have, she doesn't need validated. She knows what I'm going to say because we have the same tools mostly. And she's like, thank you for just listening and not saying
Mm-hmm.
anything and not looking at your phone while I'm trying to share this with you of what I'm
Right.
experiencing. And so I love that question. And again, it's invitation to all of us. Like, what are your
Mm.
needs? And begin to investigate. Oh man, I didn't really realize I needed this or that or what it is, and identify it. But part of this conversation, Britton, I think is centered around like I as I sit with men around the fire, we have our retreats, and I have lots of conversations on the phone and in person with men. I I I begin to see things and themes, and early on it was like guys just need to have a place to share their story. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
all going through stuff, and they have nowhere with all of life and everything that's going on. They have nowhere to share it that it's not going to get used against them somewhere, which is
Right.
what the fires do, right? Because that place is sacred and
Yeah, let's
nothing.
qualify that. The fires don't allow people to communicate so it gets used against them. The fire is a place for people to share without it being used against them.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
and that's why they're still going, is because
Right.
nothing leaks out of there.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, that feels good. We've all told our story. We've all shared the human experience through our how we've seen the world and the things that have happened to us. And one of the themes that is getting more profound to me is in this conversation around self-worth, of as you sit with guys and get to know them, you start picking up on keywords, phrases, and it's like that guy really doesn't think very highly of himself
Mm-hmm.
based on things he's done, said, and it's always
Right.
relational. It's always relational damage that we've caused to ourselves or those that we say we love. And we do love. We don't as best as we know how.
Right.
And to me it continues to go back to you can't give away what you don't have. And if the own value that you carry for yourself is low, that's what you have to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the highlighted theme that I've been seeing over the last probably year is self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the battles I've had of it on my own, and that creeps into identity and who am I without this particular skill set? If I'm not a cowboy and I'm not a good horseman and I'm not a good shoer and I'm not a good hand and I'm not a good day worker or I'm not a good salesman, fill in the blank, then
Mm-hmm.
what am I? Oh, I'm nobody. I suck. And we see this with guys that, especially in our world, get hurt. Right? And it's like, I can't do this thing anymore. And their self-value and self-worth of that thing goes away. And that's why we always say, we don't care what you do. Who are you? Who are you becoming?
Right.
Which then kind of led us into this conversation of an offering that we're going to do about figuring some of that out. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of space here to share with us, with everyone, what that looks like.
Yeah. So, my wife and I have the opportunity to facilitate a curriculum that was written out by a counselor. And it was inherently created initially for the adoption foster care system. And so if you can imagine some of the most heinous acts to deal with in psychology and emotional health, that was really kind of the position that this was created in. But in all of that, what we know is that the conversation of self-worth is universally applicable, regardless of whether you share a story of a child in China that never has their biological parents meet their needs. And because of that, they disassociate by the time that they're toddlers, so much so that they don't have any interaction. Whatever that really graphic lack of nurtured around life dynamic is, we all have some measure of that. So we can go to the most extreme to the most subtle of, same thing in my story. You can go back, you can listen to that. Man, I had really good parents, but they weren't necessarily emotionally mature, and that's not an indictment to them. It's just a fact. And if they don't have that mindset to know how to cultivate and impart, then it inherently affects the way that we see ourselves. But the beautiful thing is that that can be redeemed, because those core needs that you operate from, the way that you were created and the way that you were meant to be partnered by, that universally doesn't change. So when you see somebody that has been controlled excessively and they're a more, let's say, passive person, then oftentimes they're going to people please their way into trying to be seen and heard. Right. And the opposite of that, when you have a bit stronger personality, a more aggressive person, nobody can get a word in otherwise, because that person is going to demand that they have the voice to drive all the attention back to themselves. So it doesn't matter what the details were to cultivate them into those positions. That's where they actually landed, to believe that that's the best way that they could get their needs met. And so we share all that to say there's a way that you can go on a journey to look at some of those lies, some of those scenarios that happened where your needs were not partnered with in a healthy way. And you have the chance to explore those. What we also know is that a lot of the shame that we feel in those dynamics, you alluded to this earlier, just how much you felt horrible, the negative self-talk, right? You know what you're doing. Nobody's more critical of you than you, and all that internal dialogue. That component that's addressed in that is called shame. And we know that shame can't be healed and addressed without community. And it's the reason that counseling, one-on-one counseling, sometimes is a little bit slow in that regard, because I can try to affirm and validate all the things that are coming up. But if you don't have multiple people set in that with you and refuse to judge you in it, it's difficult for you to separate that shame off, because you can subconsciously justify that this is a one-off experience. But when it's communal and everybody there is pressing in to want to know who you are and what you represent, not just your story, then you cannot psychologically grab that agreement and continue to hide in that self-protector when everybody else is not partnering with it. You just can't. Right? So we know that shame begins to get addressed in community, and that's part of the offering of this 8-week self-worth course. We're going to launch that September 10th. 6:30 to 8:30 Central Standard Time. It'll be over Zoom, and we're just going to do an intimate group of men only. And the same pretense applies in that what's said in that group stays in that group unless you decide to go and let's say that you connect with Jeremy and Jeremy gets to hear your story and you share it. That's the only way it's going to come out, is if you share it. But it doesn't matter who shows up. We don't get to use another person's story. We don't even get to use the details of another person's story with what we say supposedly anonymity.
Yep.
Right? Like it just doesn't honor the person and their vulnerability. So that 8-week process is just going to go through this curriculum that allows you to look at what are some of those lies and limiting beliefs that constantly keep getting in the way of you getting what you want in your life. What that doesn't mean is that this is an egocentric based curriculum, because we see right now in a society of embracing mental health that we can also see a lot of, oh, well, you got to do what makes you feel good, or you deserve X, Y, and Z on account of, well, you need to be a whole, healthy person. That's true with the caveat of, well, do you really know what it is that you're going after? And is that coming from an authentic place within yourself to know that when you communicate that need, that's a really vulnerable place that you don't trust other people to partner with. And so that's what this whole journey is for, is to go on that process. It's a pretty quick deep dive to get some work done. But what I also know is that you always are met where you are. And so we say this a lot. I say this a lot. You will get out of it what you put into it, which is pretty well universal in all things in life.
Yep.
If you want some deep healing, it's available. If you just want to feel good, that's also available. And that's where I'm going to meet you at. Because maybe that's just the next step that takes you into a journey of something else that helps. And so, yeah, we want to create solutions to the problems that we keep seeing. And this is an opportunity. It's not the opportunity. Because as you've alluded to, man, maybe it's just a dude showing up at the fire, listening to other people choose to be vulnerable. And then at some point down the road, even if it's 6 months, begin to have the courage to let people hear what their journey has been. That's the on-ramp. Okay, you've been around the fire for a while. You've told your story. What's the next step? And how do we begin to teach people tools and help invite them into this conversation so that they do not generationally keep producing what they experienced? And most of the time, you use this term earlier, this pendulum swing of, if I had a super aggressive, controlling parent, the tendency for that child is to either match that and be greater than that, or be extremely passive. And it's always through the lens of, I will not be that.
Yep.
It's not through the lens of, well, who are you? What do you want to be? And so this is the offering of going on that journey. Because again, I say this often, what you do anything of, you're most likely to do everything of.
Mm-hmm. That's good. This, like we always talk about in Wild Courage, this is all invitation.
Mm-hmm.
We're not here to fix anybody, because we don't think you're messed up. We don't think you're broken. And that's some language that we've pushed back against, because you're
Mm-hmm.
where you're at.
Right.
And we have so much compassion and grace for you wherever that is, that we just want to come alongside you if you want to.
Right.
That's it. That's what this is. It's an invitation. If you're a guy like me who makes a lot of emotional based decisions and nobody feels safe around you, especially your wife or kids, because they don't know who's walking in the back door every day.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is an invitation for you to go on the journey to figure out, why do I show up the way that I do? And like you mentioned earlier, if you are tired of being a doormat because you don't think you're worthy of using your voice to set up some healthy boundaries and say, I'm not going to be talked to or treated like this anymore. I'm going to get some tools and figuring out that I'm worth being treated with respect. So if you're somebody that feels like you don't get respect anywhere, figure out who you are. Figure
Yeah.
out that you're worthy of being accepted, and you're worthy of having a voice, and you're worthy of standing up for yourself and not being a doormat and feeling beat down all the time. And if you're somebody that feels like everyone's terrified of you because you force yourself into every situation and show up big and in unhealthy ways all the time, why do I show up like that? Again, this is an invitation to come into a conversation of getting some tools to figure it out. And if you're someone that's listening to this and you're like, I got to make some changes. I cannot continue to go on with my life the way that it is, because I can see far enough down the road to see that this is a dead end road and it's going nowhere good. The timing of this is working out good. If you really want to deep dive into getting healthier, take this course, and then you can slide right into the retreat in November.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a lot, but by spring, going on the journey, you won't be the same person.
No.
You
Well,
won't.
here's the fact too, Jeremy. If you literally just count the hours, you can be a radically different person in 16 hours, because that's what the time frame is of this commitment. It's
16 hours.
merely
Think about that.
16 hours in one day. Literally in one day, if you fully devote yourself to this process, you will actually find out what you need to be a whole, healthy person. You're not going to be fixed. You just create an awareness and you get some tools so that, to your point, you roll into a retreat in November. Now, what do you get out of that retreat?
Yeah.
You roll into New Year's. You look at your goals and aspirations like we all have a tendency to do. How do I want this year to unfold? And you've got a whole new life ahead of you in 16 hours.
Yeah. We need to aim higher. We need to aim higher. What are we putting our hands to? What are we putting our time to? And this isn't degrading anyone. This is encouraging. And I want to say
That's
this
my hope.
too. I want to say this too. We feel like we are shedding light on this community in ways of some of the unhealthy things that it provides. This is our community.
It is.
My heroes are cowboys. All I've ever wanted to be since I'm 3 years old is a cowboy. Being around cowboys is where I find the most joy outside of my family unit. Wherever it's at. If it's at a roping, a branding, shipping, I don't care. We love this community. So much so that we're willing to take big swings at these things because you and I have experienced so much hope in how we are able to show up to life, because we got a few tools. We don't have anything figured out,
Right.
but the fruit of this is my wife really likes me. She always loved me. She really likes me. And I say this is how I know that I'm regulating my emotions well, is when I'm gone, I come home and my kids meet me in the driveway and jump into my arms. That's how I know that I'm showing up the way that I'm supposed to. And my wife says, we missed you. And literally will say, I really, really like you.
But I want to take pause, Jeremy, and just highlight this weekend, because one of the things that was beautiful this year that wasn't opportunistic last year is that our spouses got to join us.
Yep.
So
Big deal.
our wives were there in addition to us being there. And as much as this has been predominantly focused in men, we're still interested in family. Like,
Well,
not just
the
the whole healthy man, it's how do we have whole healthy families?
thank you for bringing that up, because that's the bigger vision of this is family. Is what
Mm,
if one guy said yes to this journey, so in that he got healthy enough and got some tools that he could regulate his emotions, show up differently for his wife, contending for her heart, model that to his children so that they go and do the same. This is how we change the planet. I know that's
mm,
a big thought, but I again, it's not going to be by voting. That's how we're not turning this thing around. It's by
correct.
healthy family. And we just happen to be men, so we're saying yes to this. To all the women that have reached out, don't feel alone. I know that women need this as well, and that's in the funnel, that's in the vision, that's in the dream. As we dream about what's next for Wild Courage, it is healthy family. It is, I mean, we're dreaming big with, like, what does a marriage retreat look like
Hmm.
for a man that's gone on the journey on his own, a woman that's gone on her journey, and to bring those two healthier people together to get some tools how to communicate and how to do life better together, again, to model to their kids so that their kids go do the same. And it really is a vision of our ceiling being our children's floor,
Right.
because then we get healthy enough. I shared this a few times this weekend, but Britton, what if we get healthy enough to model this to our children, that so much of my life was survival, I just got to get through today.
Hmm.
I had no vision for my life. I would have things I would look forward to, but I had no direction. I was not aiming high. I was aiming to get through the day. What if we get healthy enough, we can start looking down the road further enough that we get to sit around and start talking about our grandchildren and the
Hmm.
next generation?
Hmm.
Like, that's what gets me excited, is as we get healthier as a community, it's like, yeah, let's put our hands and do the hard stuff now, so our kids don't experience what we had to, in
Right.
whatever level that was. So again, that's a little bit of vision casting of what we're excited about and starting to think about. But yeah, this is a great opportunity again, guys. It's all just invitation.
Mm.
And if this is something that you're interested in taking a look at, there's no shame in it. And I guarantee you, there only good things will come of it. And I get the weight of it. I get the stakes. I get the time. But I want to say this, you're worthy of investing in yourself.
For sure. And I,
You're
I, I would
worthy of
share
it.
this. I would share this personally. I'm not advocating a course that I have not personally gone through a couple of times. Like, I have a value system of self growth. And so I'm a product of advocating for this curriculum because I found the value in it for myself.
And you've done
And
this
my
curriculum before. And
correct.
there's, I would never out anyone, obviously, but I'm running through the list of names that I know of that have all reached back out to me of how impactful this has been in their lives. And for what it's worth, a bunch of them are working cowboys or horse trainers.
Yeah.
So
I mean, there's some things there that by and large our community probably doesn't know about because it's not something that's put up in front of resource. Like, we know where to go find the big ranches and go get another job, but we don't know how to do that healthily, right? And so
yeah.
this is really the position of how do we keep these resources up front so that you know how to be the whole healthy person. It doesn't matter where you go. And to your point a while ago, Jeremy, like, I'm never going to stop playing with horses. I've got colts out here that I'm starting. That's not ever probably going to stop in my journey. But as I told you this weekend, I refuse to be identified as a horse trainer who only cultivates a horse to send back in the hands of a person that's using that horse to get their needs met rather than going after another person to do it in a healthy way.
Yeah, so good. And
That's my
you're
public service announcement.
I also am going to say something that you're probably going to dog cuss me for, but Britton would never say this. But I found out a different way that he's going to have 2 or 3 horses that he started and worked with that are going to be in the NFR this year. I mean, the run for the NFR is closing down, and those horses are looking like they're going to make it. And I just want to say that, Britton, because of your humility, and you never talk about it, and I love that I found that out, and I think it's really badass that you have this skill set, and that's not your identity. That's not what you hang your shingle on, but it's a reality of who you are as a horseman and the fruit of your knowledge of that industry and what you have done. So just a little shout out to you. I know that that's nothing you would ever say, but I just think it's freaking cool, man. And I celebrate you in that, because that's really cool.
Yeah,
But
thank you.
if this is something you're interested in, again, we'll have all the info in the show notes. Go to our website, thewildcourage.org. You can find out more about fires near you, and our fall retreat application is up and ready to go. We take limited spots. That's filling up fast already, and we haven't even promoted it that much. So it's going to be in Idaho the second week of November, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And this would be a great course to segue right into that if you really want to go after this. So
For sure.
check it out. And Britton, thank you. Thank you for your friendship, and thank you for always asking me that question. What do I need?
Yeah. It's always an honor to share this space with you and for the impact that you're having. I loved watching your expression when a photo of your dad was shown to you this weekend.
Mm,
And I share that with you, knowing that our daddies are proud of the journey that we're on
yeah.
and the impact
Pretty
that we
cool.
can have. So I just honor you and your yes in this journey of wild courage, and honor to be a part of that process as well. And for you as and you as a person, regardless of all this, I just really value you as a person and as a friend. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I love you, brother.
Love you too, bud.
Thanks, guys. Adios.